Vincent was sitting in his wheelchair, right at the edge of the water, his face buried in his hands. "Vincent!" she cried out, running toward him. He didn't move. Danielle dropped to her knees in front of him and looked up. His eyes were red, his cheeks streaked with tears. Her own eyes welled up instantly. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. Then his shoulders began to shake and he cried harder, allowing himself to melt into the hug. She held him tighter. They stayed that way for a long moment, until finally she whispered, "You're not alone, Vincent." "Why do you care?" Danielle pulled back and looked at him with glistening eyes. "Because I see you. I see the pain in your eyes. I know what it's like to carry anger and pretend you're okay." He shook his head slowly. "I've treated you horribly. I've treated everyone horribly. Why are you still kind to me?" "Because I know you're not really angry at me," she said softly. "You're angry at life. Angry at people who failed you. But Vincent, it's okay to be mad. It's okay to feel broken. What's not okay is punishing yourself and others for something you couldn't control." Vincent stared at her, silent. Vincent sat by the wide glass window of the family's mansion, staring out into the lush gardens he never cared to visit anymore. Another day, another face to argue with. The only sounds in the house were the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant shuffling of feet. Probably Anita, his newest nanny. He didn't bother calling her. She would come soon, like the others, and just like the others, she would leave. They all did, eventually. Vincent was 29 years old, but he had lived the life of a prisoner. Not because of the luxury mansion or the cars parked outside, but because of the wheelchair he had been confined to since he was 3. The pool incident, that cursed day. He didn't remember much, just that he had been alone, wandering in the big house, and ended up floating helplessly in the water until everything went dark. His parents were in Italy that time, or maybe it was France. They were always somewhere. So Vincent learned to live without them. And when he became old enough to understand what happened, the bitterness took root like an unshakable tree. Anita arrived with his breakfast tray. She was small, with kind eyes and soft hands, but he had already decided he wouldn't like her. "You're late," Vincent said without looking up. "It's just 5 minutes past, sir," she replied gently. 5 minutes is 5 minutes too long, he snapped, wheeling backward with a jerk. The tray rattled in her hands. "I'll do better next time." "There won't be a next time," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. Her shoulders tensed. The days passed with Vincent finding fault in everything she did. He complained about the temperature of his tea, the way she folded his clothes, how she addressed him. One day, he deliberately knocked over a cup of water just to see her flinch. She quietly cleaned it without saying a word. One evening, after nearly 2 months of tolerating his cruel remarks and mood swings, Anita had had enough. It happened during a family dinner. One of those rare occasions when his parents were actually present. His mother, Grace, was radiant in a silk wrapper, and his father, Martin, looked tired but dignified. The dining table was long and decorated with golden candles, fresh fruit and expensive china. The air smelled of spicy jollof rice and roasted chicken, but there was no warmth in the room. Vincent looked at Anita, standing at his side, and then purposely dropped his fork to the ground. "Pick it up," he said. Grace's eyes widened. "Vincent, she's serving dinner, not your servant." "She's paid to help me," he replied coldly. "Let her help." Anita stared at him. "I'm done," she exclaimed. I have tried to be kind to him. I have done everything with patience. But this is too much. I cannot work like this." Martin sat up. "Anita, please." "No, sir," she interrupted firmly. "I can't do this anymore. He insults, belittles, and treats everyone around him like garbage. I'm a human being, not a punching bag." Grace stood too. "Please, Anita, you've been good to him. Maybe if we talk..." I want to be paid for the days I've worked, she said, looking directly at Grace. I won't spend another night in this house. Vincent smiled bitterly. Another one bites the dust. His mother, clearly shaken, pulled her phone and made the transfer on the spot. Anita took one last glance at Vincent, her eyes full of sadness rather than anger, then walked out. There was a heavy silence in the room. Grace turned to Vincent. You are a grown man now, Vincent. You can't keep doing this. This isn't about us anymore. You need to stop using your pain to hurt people who care. Vincent's jaw tightened. I don't want to hear this, he said coldly. The sun had barely risen when Grace was already pacing across the living room floor, her silk robe fluttering with every step. Her phone was pressed tightly to her ear as she spoke with one of the familiar nanny agencies they had used over the years. I understand, but we're willing to pay more this time, she said, her tone calm but strained. He just needs someone who is patient. Please, can't you send one person? Anyone? The voice on the other end gave a practiced sigh. I'm sorry, Ma. We currently don't have anyone available. Maybe next month? Grace ended the call, and this was the 5th agency that had told her the same thing. No one wanted to work with Vincent anymore. Word had spread. Even the most professional carers weren't willing to tolerate the emotional exhaustion that came with being around him. Martin walked in, adjusting his wristwatch. Any luck? No, she said, swallowing her frustration. They're all lying. No one wants to deal with Vincent, and I can't blame them. We leave for Ghana tomorrow morning. We can't travel with this hanging over our heads. I know, she said. Then after a brief pause, she added, I'll call Lara, maybe she can help. Lara, a close friend of Grace's who had a wide network, answered the call cheerfully, and after hearing Grace's plight, she promised to post the vacancy online. I'll do it now and keep you posted, she assured. Surprisingly, within a few hours, a few people responded to the advert, expressing interest in the position despite the brief description. Grace scheduled the interviews for the next day. The following morning, several young women showed up at the mansion. One of them was Danielle, a soft-faced beauty in her mid-20s with big brown eyes and tightly coiled natural hair tied into a puff. She wore a simple dress and held her small purse close to her chest. Unlike the others, she wasn't here because she had years of caregiving experience. In fact, she had none. Danielle had grown up in the heart of Abeokuta, raised by her grandmother after her parents passed in a road accident. She had always dreamed of becoming a singer. Her voice was her treasure, rich, soulful, and filled with emotions people often couldn't explain. But dreams needed money, and in her case, money was something she never had. When she saw the job advert with the salary included, she didn't think twice. The women were called in one by one, but each interview barely lasted 5 minutes before the candidates came out muttering under their breath, some even swearing. One woman walked out fuming, snapping her fingers in the air. "Nonsense," she said. "I've never been so insulted in my life." Danielle blinked, curious but undeterred. Whatever it was, she needed this job. Eventually, her name was called. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked confidently into the room. Inside, Vincent, a brooding presence in his motorized wheelchair. His mother sat beside him, looking hopeful but visibly exhausted. Danielle greeted politely, offering a small smile. Grace smiled back. "Thank you for coming. I'm Grace. This is my son, Vincent." "You're the last one?" "Yes," Danielle replied. "Of course," he muttered. Grace turned to Danielle. "We're looking for someone to assist Vincent. He's independent in many ways, but still needs help around the house. Cooking, occasional lifting, reminders for therapy. It's a full-time role. Do you think you can handle that?" Danielle's eyes sparkled with sincerity. "Yes, Ma, I can." "Do you have any experience?" "No, Ma, but I'm a fast learner." Before Grace could say more, Vincent leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Is this how you dress for interviews?" he asked flatly. "You look like someone heading to a church choir practice." Danielle's cheeks flushed slightly, but her smile didn't fade. I dressed modestly, sir. I didn't know there was a dress code. He scoffed. What's your educational background? I studied English at a polytechnic, sir, but I had to drop out in my second year due to family problems. Of course you did, he muttered. And what's wrong with your arms? You look malnourished. Have you ever eaten a full meal in your life? Danielle blinked at him, stunned for a moment, not by the words but by how casually they were delivered. Still, she smiled. No, sir, I eat just fine, she replied calmly. Vincent studied her face, expecting the usual reaction, a flinch, a snapped reply, or even a storm out like the rest. But Danielle just stood there, composed, unshaken. It was as if she didn't hear the insults, or didn't care. Something about that unsettled him. Danielle woke up before the sun and took her time preparing for the day. Her face glowed with excitement as she hummed a soft tune while tying her hair into a neat puff. She quietly began her routine, sweeping, dusting, and mopping the hallway floor. Vincent noticed the sound and glanced at the clock. It was unusually early. When Danielle entered his room with a cheerful "Good morning, sir," he stared at her suspiciously. Why are you so early? He asked, squinting. I like to be prepared, she answered simply. It gives me peace of mind. Vincent rolled his eyes and turned away. We'll see how long that lasts. Over the next few days, Vincent tried his best to do what he always did, frustrate her. He would intentionally drop things on the floor after she cleaned, slosh water on the tiles she had just mopped, and accuse her of forgetting his medications even when she hadn't. But Danielle responded with patience and grace every single time. She would smile, clean again, and gently remind him, I'm here to help, not fight. Her unshakable kindness only irritated him more, or maybe confused him. No one had lasted this long without snapping. By the end of the first month, even Grace had noticed the difference. She's doing so well, Vincent, she said over the phone during a brief break from work. I really like her. She's the best we've had. Vincent didn't respond. He only stared at the ceiling in silence. 2 more months passed. Danielle still showed up early, still did her tasks diligently, still treated Vincent with respect, no matter how cold or rude he became. And although Vincent remained guarded, something inside him had started to shift. But he didn't want to admit it. Then, one morning, Danielle walked into the house and noticed something strange. Vincent wasn't in his room. His bed was made, the room untouched, and his wheelchair was missing. Panic instantly welled up in her chest. She checked the bathroom, empty. She checked the study, the gym room, the back room. Nothing. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and called Grace. Ma, I can't find Vincent, she said, trying to stay calm. He's not in his room or anywhere in the house. Grace's voice was worried but steady. Go outside, check, near the pool. He sometimes goes there early when he's overwhelmed. Danielle's breath caught. She hung up and rushed outside, her slippers smacking against the tiled floor. As she turned the corner to the pool, she saw him. Vincent was sitting in his wheelchair, right at the edge of the water, his face buried in his hands. Vincent, she cried out, running toward him. He didn't move. Danielle dropped to her knees in front of him and looked up. His eyes were red, his cheeks streaked with tears. Her own eyes welled up instantly. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. Then his shoulders began to shake and he cried harder, allowing himself to melt into the hug. She held him tighter. They stayed that way for a long moment, until finally she whispered, You're not alone, Vincent. Why do you care? Danielle pulled back and looked at him with glistening eyes. Because I see you. I see the pain in your eyes. I know what it's like to carry anger and pretend you're okay. He shook his head slowly. I've treated you horribly. I've treated everyone horribly. Why are you still kind to me? Because I know you're not really angry at me, she said softly. You're angry at life. Angry at people who failed you. But Vincent, It's okay to be mad. It's okay to feel broken. What's not okay is punishing yourself and others for something you couldn't control. Vincent stared at her, silent. You didn't cause this, she continued. You didn't choose this. But you're choosing now, and you can choose to let go. A tear rolled down his cheek. I'm angry at them. My parents, they were never there. I got hurt because the nanny wasn't watching. I could have died. And now I'm stuck like this, and every time I see someone caring for me, I hate them for it, because it reminds me. Danielle reached out and held his hand. Then start healing, Vincent. Start with forgiveness. Not for them, but for yourself. Vincent lowered his gaze, the weight of his confession hanging heavy between them. But for the first time, he felt lighter. Danielle gently wheeled Vincent back into the house, the morning sunlight casting a golden glow over the tiled floors. Though neither of them spoke much, a soft peace hung in the air between them. Vincent glanced at her with a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. From that day forward, things began to change. Vincent, who had once viewed every caregiver as an enemy, now found comfort in Danielle's presence. He started talking more, not just about his routines, but about his childhood, his fears, his dreams, and the moments he never thought he'd share with anyone. And when the pain crept in again, as it often did in the quiet moments, Danielle would sing to him. Her voice, soft and soothing, wrapped around him like a blanket. Her songs reminded him that healing was possible, even for someone like him. Vincent's parents, Martin and Grace, noticed the transformation almost immediately. The son, who once barely acknowledged their calls, now laughed on video chats and even initiated conversations. He smiled more, teased Danielle like a friend, and carried himself with a spark they hadn't seen in years. Grace pulled Danielle aside one afternoon, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "We tried everything, every therapist, every nurse, but you brought our son back. He just needed someone to listen." As time passed, their bond deepened. Vincent, once closed off to the idea of socializing, began stepping out with Danielle. She would wheel him to quaint cafes and parks, and they would sit, sipping drinks and talking for hours. He still refused the idea of dating at first, saying no woman would ever look past the chair. But Danielle challenged that thought gently. "Someone will see you for who you really are." Vincent didn't respond immediately. His eyes were on hers, studying her expression. Vincent tried to hide it, but every look he gave her, every small gesture, from picking out her favorite snacks to remembering the lyrics to her favorite songs, spoke volumes. He didn't know when it happened, only that it had. Somewhere between the late-night talks and the midday laughter, he'd fallen. Hard. On the morning of his 30th birthday, Vincent woke up to the sound of soft humming. He blinked and saw Danielle, standing in his room with a small cake, candles flickering gently. Behind her were his parents, both smiling, and a few close family members clapping as they sang "Happy Birthday." Tears filled Vincent's eyes. He hadn't had a birthday like this in decades. No formal parties with strangers, just family, just love. When the song ended, he looked at Danielle, overwhelmed with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. "This means everything." Danielle smiled. "You deserve happiness, Vincent. You always have." He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "There's something I need to say." Everyone fell silent. Vincent's voice trembled slightly as he continued. "I've been through a lot. I felt things I didn't know how to explain. But in all of it, Danielle, you've been my light. You never gave up on me. You saw me when I couldn't even see myself." He turned his chair slightly to face her. "I love you, Danielle. I know I shouldn't have fallen, but I did. And I don't want to pretend anymore." Danielle stood frozen, eyes wide in shock. For a long second, no one said a word. Vincent's heart thudded loudly in his chest. He braced himself for rejection, for that polite smile that would mean they could never be the same again. But then Danielle walked up to him, cupped his face gently and said softly, "I love you too." The room erupted into applause and joyful laughter. Grace wiped her tears and Vincent pulled Danielle into a hug, their first real embrace. And then, without hesitation, their lips met in a soft, tender kiss that felt like the closing of a long chapter and the beginning of a new one. From that day forward, their love blossomed. They were inseparable, partners, best friends, and soulmates. Vincent found peace not because the past had changed, but because he had finally forgiven it. And more importantly, he had forgiven himself. With Vincent's full support, Danielle returned to her music. He sponsored her first studio sessions, cheered her on at every small show, and was her biggest fan when she finally released her first single. Together, they built a life not defined by pain or disability, but by strength, hope, and unshakable love. And they lived happily ever after,